right, we are live. This is the Formula One Fans of America show, coming to you typically every Monday. But I had a little bit of an incident in a solo race on an electric scooter on Sunday, so we decided to postpone to tonight. I'm okay, just banged up and bruised, nothing too crazy. We are going to. Yeah, I was going to say, let me go ahead and introduce everybody. I've got with me Jay and Fabian. Greg is working, unfortunately, so he's out this week. But this week we are going to dig into the 1970s, first week of the summer break. So no racing to discuss from the past week. So this week we're going to dig into the 1970s. Specifically, we're going to jump in on 1976, the Nürburgring race, the battle between Niki Lauda and James Hunt. Some interesting, very, very interesting cars, technology. I mean, there was basically no regulations minus a handful of ones that were often flouted in Formula One. But as far as engine regulations go, it was pretty wide open. So that led to some interesting things that happened on track. We also had a female racing driver. And very uniquely, we have, seemingly these days uniquely, we had an American driver winning Grand Prix in 1976 as well. So great year in the history of the sport. And yeah, welcome guys, welcome on.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Always look forward to this day.
So we're going to jump straight into our regular segment. We were right, we were wrong. Kicking off with last week's episode, I was wrong. Fabian was right. He said, Checo is signed. Yeah, and I said, okay, I'll believe it when I see it from F1.com and ESPN. And literally right after the episode, I go check my phone, and I have notifications for both telling me that Fabian was indeed right. Checo is going to be staying in the Red Bull family. That's something that we know. It's not necessarily in that second seat, but he will be staying as a driver for Red Bull for the remainder of the season.
Perhaps.
Well, and we'll see. There is still the performance clause in his contract where if he is a significant amount behind Max, and I think that's what they'll lean on if they choose to demote him, I would anticipate a demotion of some sort. They may give him a few races coming after the summer break. We do have the Mexican Grand Prix coming up. That's good for all parties involved to have him involved into the Mexican Grand Prix. There's a lot of money riding on this sort of thing, and we can't negate the role and prevalence that money plays in this sport. It sort of drives a lot of decision making. And so I think that's probably what they're holding out for most. Otherwise, the decision seems to be responded to incredulously by just about every fan, because they're like, why is this guy allowed to stay in this seat? Especially in a sport where we've discussed a lack of loyalty. What are your guys' takes on it?
Go ahead, Jay.
I think it's a huge mistake. I understand money talks and everything, but realistically, you have two GPs that this is really going to affect. You've got the Mexico Grand Prix and you've got COTA, where the Hispanic population is booming, obviously. And they want to see a driver that's Hispanic. I completely understand that. But at the same time, you're hurting the sport. Like, I know Christian Horner has come out and said numerous times about pay drivers and everything else. And, we bash the hell out of Room Temperature IQ and several others. But Checo might be the ultimate pay driver, if you think about it.
Could be.
His sponsorship deals are up in the, I want to say up in the $70 to $80 million range.
Yeah,
that's not even including his social media revenue and his merchandise revenue. So I get where Red Bull's coming from, but from everything I've read, they told Max at the Belgian Grand Prix, Ricciardo will be your teammate come Monday. Liberty Media is the one that stepped in and said, guys, let's not get hasty here. Because you don't blow a 2nd to 8th place Ross in the Red Bull family and somehow stay. Ask Gasly, ask Kvyat, ask Albon. I mean, there's numerous drivers that have caught the axe for less at this point. And for them to keep Checo is just an embarrassment to what they're trying to do.
That's pretty detailed and comprehensive and fair, actually, because it looks like that's exactly what it really ultimately boils down to. You know, it's saving face, not upsetting a big fan base, giving it a little time to figure it out, and willing to take it on the chin if it doesn't go the right way. And hopefully their out clauses on performance will be the linchpin that they need if they've got to really do something and they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, basically. True.
Yeah,
what about you, Rich?
I have to agree. No, I would concur with everything Jay said. You know, not to be unoriginal. I don't have anything else to offer on it. Yeah, it's again, it's sort of a baffling decision, I think, to a lot of people because we've seen so much more cutthroat moves in F1.
Right.
If this leads to any kind of loyalty within the sport, well, then all for the better. But I think we can all point to where the loyalty lies, and that's to the almighty dollar. Checo makes something like $30 million a year off of social media. I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
Right.
Holy cow.
So 30 million off of social media, and he has 60% of the revenue of the merchandise that comes through redbull.com. So, like I said, I understand where Red Bull is at money-wise, but at the same time, like, you literally just lied to your number one driver who's already on a razor's edge about leaving. Like, come on now, guys. Also, fun fact.
You think Max is... Before I let you move on, do you think Max really is on a razor's edge about staying?
Absolutely.
Because
he has
Mercedes 2026, baby.
I don't even think it'll go to 2026. I think it'll be 2025. Because Newey gone is good. That's going to hurt performance. Honda's gone in 2026. They know that he knows that's going to be a problem. Mercedes has jumped from midfield to front of the pack. Ferrari is one upgrade away, realistically, to fixing that car again and being the fastest car on the grid again. McLaren, if they can ever figure out their driver situation, is back up in the fight. Like, I don't think he loses the world title this year, but I don't think he's going to be happy with the results at this point. And I can't blame him. I mean, realistically. The only thing I can say, though, is the fact that Yost sitting there yapping in his ear is probably the worst mistake ever because, let's be honest here, Yost did absolute shit in the car, and he's an absolute shit human being. So, like, I don't know what else to say on that one. I mean, there's only so much Max is going to take, though. Like, Max cannot race the way that he wants to race whenever he's facing down the entire pack. Checo's job as the second driver is to give them options. If he's not giving them options, then he's useless. So, I mean, you've got no strategy that Max can use. So they're going to constantly get undercut, which is going to get him pissed off more and more every week. You have them negating Marco every chance they get, which I think they should just keep him away from a mic, but hey, what do I know? Yeah. His car's falling away from him. He has people who are literally inferior drivers to his talent being able to get around him and do whatever they want. So that knocks off, and the turmoil inside of Red Bull that Yost has created at this point. Because I don't know if you guys remember, but Yost and Christian Horner both were after the same executive assistant. That's what caused this whole mess, is that Horner was like, no more of this. I'm done. She went to Yost. Yost is like, report this shit now. Get it out in the open. And that one, I believe, has been confirmed by 3 sources inside of Red Bull. So... Also, I've heard that Yost is the one that released File 76. So, I mean, I really have to laugh about that one. But all in all,
That would be amazing. But
that
I
would be
don't
the
think
ultimate
that's it.
move. That would be the
Yeah.
ultimate move right there. But so you don't have peace inside of the team anymore. You don't have the number one car anymore. You don't have a support system for Max anymore. Literally, it's falling apart on him. He's not going to stay and put up with that. He knows that he only has maybe 7-8 years at max at the top of, no pun intended there, at the top of the food chain. So what do? I mean, he's always said, I'm not looking at numbers. I'm not trying to chase records, etc., etc. But if he has that chance, especially to stick at the Lewis, I think he would. So
Yeah, no doubt about that.
That's just
So
where I'm at.
some other some current
I was
news.
Other clause. That was what we
Some
got in, and then you distracted me because I'm ADHD as hell.
No, apologies.
The other clause is there's the 100-point clause, but Checo cannot be any further back than 5 places in the World Driver Championship than Max. So if he hits both of those clauses, there is zero way that they can keep that contract. Like none. And I don't even think Liberty Media can say a word about it at that point. Because why let it be in there whenever you're just going to have that happen? So
I would speculate that would be what they're actually
Freeze.
waiting for then. You know what I mean? If we're not going for the 100 points, which he quite clearly is, if it's this, big drawback, then they can point to both these things in his performance and say, okay, this is why we're dropping you, man.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very curious. Like, I'm honestly want him to do better. I want him to come back to like see him resurrect himself from this fall and come back after the summer break, just firing on all cylinders, pun intended, and take pole, finish 1-2 with Max, do some kind of teamwork, reinvigorate yourself. I hope we see it from him because he's a pretty tenured driver, and when he doesn't have some sort of distraction or something weighing him down mentally, he can perform very, very well. It's just for whatever reason, and again, we speculate that it might be the crash from Monaco that sort of derailed his train of thought and his focus from competing. And again, we highlight that.
Yeah, I was saying
we
that's
highlight just how that focus
things.
is, just how key that focus is to performing. Yeah. And if you have it and you have a truly great day, on a GP weekend, you can perform well above your typical average, the way we've seen it time and again with Lance Stroll. He comes out with an injury. He's got all this motivation. It's the pain takes his mind off of whatever else is going through his mind when he's crashing into people and losing all spatial awareness. So there's got to be just that fire that you have and that hones in on your focus, the way we like to see. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry for cutting you off, Fabian.
No, I was saying that, whoever it was that brought up the point that the accident, the crash in Monaco and the fact that he's got kids, that was a very important observation because that'll definitely change your mindset about some things. It's the same for any parent who's, getting up there in age, and for Formula One drivers, we're talking, late 30s and 40s. But, when you've got kids and you're flying around like that and you have your car get craned off the ground looking like something your 3-year-old just destroyed, it can give you cause for pause. There's no doubt about it. And that's probably the most logical explanation for why he's had such a drastic fall off from where he was at the start of the season to where he is now, and what happened ever since Monaco, in fact. So very important part to keep bringing up in conversation for other people to digest and consider, because that's a big one. Your mortality will definitely scream down your face, when stuff like that happens. It's crazy.
Yeah, as 3 fathers ourselves, I think we can all agree that it completely changes your outlook on life. It makes you question a lot about yourself and who and how you are and how you're going to be in the future. And nothing will motivate you more than your love of your children. It is very powerful. So he's one of 3 fathers currently on the grid. I think there's something to say about that despite their age, most of these guys, some of them are in their early 20s, some of them later 20s, now in their 30s, but they've still not had children. Lewis Hamilton doesn't have any kids that we know of. Some of these longer guys that are in the sport, you question whether that's part of that motivation.
Right.
Maybe I kind of delay that part or just abort it altogether. Oh, not the right word. Just abate it altogether. Not engage in that altogether. We're not trying to get political here. That was a poor choice of words.
That's that military vernacular,
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Not
abort mission.
politically about babies. Yes, abort the mission. I don't want to do this. Oh my word.
No,
Okay,
Let's segue
so-
over into the 1970s. Go ahead, Jay.
Sure.
I was going to say, before we segue off of this, what happened last year? Checo was shit last year too.
He wasn't great.
No, he
It
had
wasn't great.
He had like 8 races where he shit the bed, literally. I
He
mean,
had some bad races.
okay, and then there were 2 races before that he was already doing bad in Miami and Imola. He did pretty bad on top.
Miami was
So-
definitely the downturn of this. He started out the season going 1-2 in the
Right.
Middle Eastern races. And he was performing in the way that we would have expected, the way I think Red Bull expected and his fans expected. But then again, like something happened, and it's something that impacts his mental in a manner that allows him to not focus the way that he needs to be, and is just something's going on in the back of his mind, and it's
Then he
preventing
needs
him from
to be-
racing the way it needs to be. We
Then
might
he
see
needs to be
him
off the
retire
grid because
himself.
he's distracted.
You very well might.
I was
and
going to
that
say
would be-
we might see him voluntarily step away from all of this and say, you know what, like he produced this statement to the media for a reason, right? These guys tend to not say too many things on accident, sometimes out of ignorance or naivete, but he released a statement that he didn't want to quit because that's not the example he wanted to set for his children, which is what incited the thought in me that like, oh, now I see where your mind is at. It's with your children. And after these crashes that you've had, some of them very severe, that one in Monaco being the most, with you just look at that car.
Yeah.
I think that sort of puts it in you of like, oh man, maybe this isn't worth it anymore.
Right.
But we do need to segue and get started into the 70s, specifically the 1976 season. We're going to touch on one of my favorite movies of all time, but the movie Rush. And Ron Howard is a absolutely brilliant director. I don't know if you guys know this fun fact about him. He was on a television show that spanned, I believe, 13 seasons and was beloved by America. Happy Days. He was Richie Cunningham on Happy Days. Like, I don't remember where I heard this, but I was like, no way. And then I went and looked at it and I was like, oh my word. Like, yes, he was. He was Richie Cunningham on Happy Days. And then he went on to direct some of the.
He was also Opie on Mayberry RFD.
No.
Yeah, so that goes back
All
into
right.
I see at 60 years old, I can take you a little further back. Yes, exactly.
No way.
I used
So
to
you've got
hell out
two
of it.
iconic shows that he was a part of where he learned his craft.
So I watched Nick at Night with my grandparents growing up. It's
Those
crazy
were my
because the
bedtime
generation of television and film and just the way it went from being very generic and formulaic to the movies that he made, which were some of the most artistic, advanced
No,
films
he's
of
phenomenal.
the generation in his time. He's, one of the most brilliant people in Hollywood. But yeah, wow, didn't even know that about him. So
Yeah.
Ron Howard, great guy, made
Awesome.
one of the greatest F1 movies probably until this next one comes out. So we'll see what this has for us next summer. But we had the great battle from James Hunt and Niki Lauda in 1976, and Niki Lauda coming back from that injury was nothing short of spectacular. Even prior to that, he had raced with broken ribs from a crash, and I was just like, how, and especially in those cars, as uncomfortable as they were, there was not an ounce of cover. Everything was spared for weight, and to do it from with broken ribs, it just a testament to his grit, his like strength of character and commitment to what he was doing. I would say, my favorite driver of the 70s would probably be Niki Lauda. It's hard to deny the success that he had with the obstacles that he overcame. And I'm very glad that they made that movie so that story gets shared and told with so many people. We had deaths on the grid that year as well. We had fans that were killed as well. And we almost lost Niki Lauda that year. And won his final championship, I think the year before I was born. But an amazing, amazing driver. What did you guys think about that battle that year, that race? Like, what do you guys have for this?
I thought it was amazing. I mean, first of all, Niki Lauda. I watched that movie only recently, and I would say recently, as in this year, was the first time I ever saw it. I watched it in February, right before the season kicked off, as I was digesting as much racing content as I could, in preparation, greasing the skids for the season. And that the imagery, the storytelling, the reality of the majority of what's in that film. It wasn't a mechanical failure, but that's another story. But just the way he portrayed Niki it's indelible. Like, I think about that watching races. I could be watching a race and see somebody coming up to a very similar situation where there's a breaking point, or they're coming into a full out turn, turn straight, and that will pop into my head, like as vividly as the Grosjean thing will pop into your head when you hear the word fire in association with motorsports. His name, will automatically come up in the images of what occurred to him. Same thing with the movie Rush and with the race. The race was wild. I mean, the idea that they even raced it was crazy, especially when you've got guys like him that have literally true grit. There's nothing soft about Niki Lauda. So when he's standing there telling you we probably shouldn't be doing this, somebody's not listening. I thought it was an incredible feat of racing history for them to even do it. It's amazing that more people didn't get hurt. The 70s were a rough time for the sport. They were still having a lot of issues, and I'm really grateful in the aftermath. Unfortunately, he lived until it was time for him to go. I'm glad that there were safety innovations and things that emerged from what occurred there. There was a deep analysis of his perspective, what he shared. Let's not do it. They did it. Then what occurred, the contingents, accidents and things that occurred around that. There's just a whole lot to unpack there. And so the movie does a great job of doing that. So people who've never seen the race and would rather catch it in a cinematic format absolutely must go see Rush. Pull it up on Prime and check it out, because it's great. And Lauda and the entire field, man, they were just gladiators out there, dude. It was crazy.
It was insane. Yeah, I think they start the movie by saying, 2 out of the 20 plus drivers will not finish the season, either through injury or death. And so you're looking at a 10% odds and chance of dying. And then, he even says he calculates in wagers risk. So if there's a percentage more, he, doesn't think they should do it. One of the reasons why it took 6 minutes to get him into a helicopter. That track that they did, it was the last time they ever raced on that track, on the Nordschleife. And the reason why was because it was too big. They would have needed 5 times the amount of safety crews and cars to effectively and safely run that race. And that wasn't available. It didn't happen. And that was what led ultimately to the severity of his injuries. He got hit twice after he wrecked, and that certainly didn't help matters, but you had drivers getting out of their cars and even one stopping in the middle of his race to get out of the car and help him out. It just goes to show that there was a lot of camaraderie amongst the drivers, more than what's portrayed in that movie. It was, sort of brothers in arms, I think, in many cases, and even amongst himself and James Hunt. They were more closer friends than many people realized. It's just, whenever you're watching something, everybody loves the storyline. Everybody wants that to be there, that they like, and he comments it on at the very end of the movie. And it says, people always thought that we had this bitter personal rivalry, but we didn't. He was more of a friend than anything. He was an enemy on the track. And they were a lot closer than most people thought. Unfortunately, we lost James Hunt well before his time at the age of 45. But as quoted from Niki Lauda, I wasn't surprised either. He lived a very fast partying lifestyle. I think if you're handed everything, and as he sort of was in his life, he didn't struggle for money or finances, and he could go and choose to be what he wanted, and he wanted to go live an exciting life, and he certainly did. Definitely gave Lauda a run for his money. Very conflicting styles, like yin and yang, his personalities. One is just the partying playboy, and the other is the disciplined, just engineering mind that was so dedicated to everything that he did in F1. And it's funny to see those two conflicting styles be competitive with each other.
No doubt.
You had 12-cylinder engines back then in this time. So let's talk about, Jay, unless you have something. I think I cut you off and didn't even let you comment on this rivalry.
Oh, no, that was arguably the greatest rivalry in the sport for probably till Prost and Senna, maybe Schumacher thrown in there every now and again. So there's not much really to say on that one. I mean, granted, you're the aficionado on this one, Rich, so I'll let you take that. But as far as the 70s go, I mean, there were a lot of good races. And I think, honestly, arguably the best one was the 71 Monza. I mean, that race was beyond close. I think it came down to 0.265 or something stupid separation between first and second. Like, they were literally hammering away, and first place changed. I don't even remember how many times. One, somebody had a tear off, fly into their engine. Another dude lost his suspension. Like, it was a wild ass race. So definitely don't let those get overshadowed. But I got a question for you guys. I mean, obviously, Rich, you've already said it. Fabian, favorite driver from the 70s?
So when I was thinking of favorite drivers, at first, of course, was thinking about James Clark, because that was the one that was, he was around when I was born, and he died in 68, it turned out, not in the 70s. And it was a racing incident, actually, that took his life. Lauda is definitely way up on the top of my list, because he's just like his mind, man. The guy, I'm real, sapio in my head, right? So I love intelligence. I love that. Like that will bond me to you. This is why Jay and I get along already, because I don't agree with half the shit he says, but he's so freaking smart. I could talk to this guy forever, right? So no, really, Lauda was brilliant. That dude was a pioneer. He's a pioneer in life, in the sport, and a pioneer in death in the sport, unfortunately. He did so much. Look at, he survives this crash, and he goes on to be so demonstrably involved in so many different things about the development of the sport. And then, even takes a shine to Hamilton and gets him to go to Mercedes, which that's a career defining move if there ever was one. I wonder if there are any times when Lewis remembers when he was on the fence thinking, I'm not going over there with this German guy and mess around with these people. I'm going to stay over here with the other folks. The man just had a vision. It was second nature to him, driving the car, withstanding those G's, like you said, in a cockpit that wasn't designed to keep them as stationary as they could be. I mean, I did look it up and saw that in 68 was when the recommendations came out for the seat harnesses, the fire resistant clothing, and the shatterproof visors. Okay. So that stuff was in its infancy. And these guys were still climbing into those cars. And you notice, and it's true, because you can look at the real footage and you can look at the movie footage. When Lauda put his body in the seat of that car, he became something very different, because he was cocky and he was snarky, because he was smart and brilliant. He probably was on the spectrum that didn't exist back then, But when he got in that car, man, it was game on. And it's hard not to put him at the top of the list. It really is.
I support that.
Yeah, it's hard to name anybody who did more during the 70s and then after the 70s in the sport of Formula One. And so Andretti for us is Americans. We've got a good comment from Trey. Andretti is an American in there. Also just contributes to the uniqueness of the year that we're focusing on, 1976. In that year, we had something very rare, especially nowadays, a winning GP US driver. And so shout out to Mario Andretti. Amazing driver. And when I grew up playing the video game from F1, and that was my first thing about F1. They even had like this tiny little steering wheel and thing that you could do with a screen on it. And it was like the first driving racing game I'd ever seen when I think I was 4 or 5 years old. And I loved it immediately. So yeah, Mario Andretti was huge.
Was that EA's then too? Was that Electronic Arts also that did that one?
I don't believe so, but we'll fact check that. Yeah, we'll fact check that and get back. But yeah, there was also like an old little like 3-button or like a joystick, not a joystick, but like a directional pad and A and B button for a racing game. It was just like one of those cheap little arcade games you get as a stocking stuffer. It was Andretti Racing that I loved. Other oddities from 1976. We had a female racing driver on the grid scoring points, which Lele Lombardi. Amazing. And by today's standards would have scored more points. So 1976, the only way you scored points was in the top 8 drivers, I believe. And she placed in the top 10 multiple times. So she would have scored more points than she had. But she goes down in history as the only female F1 racing driver to score points. She's also one of the 3 openly gay drivers to ever race in Formula One. And so you had a lot of unique things going on in 1976 that were not happening currently today. You also had a 6-wheeled F1 car, because the racing restrictions then were narrowed the front end of the car to 1.5 meters. But there was nothing against the rules that said you couldn't use more than 4 wheels. So you had the Tyrrell, was it the P34? Yeah, the P34. They came out and came onto the grid with 6 wheels, an insane feat of engineering. It said that because of the downforce and the additional traction that it created, it was an additional like 40 horsepower at 60 to 70 miles an hour, 40 to 50 horsepower. So just out of sheer engineering of how do we overcome these regulations with the thinning of the front end and still get more front end grip and better braking and acceleration, like a truly technical engineering marvel. And it was competitive. That's what makes this the most remarkable, is that they took this insane oddity and made it into a competitive Formula One car, where this 6-wheeled engineering marvel was taking like podiums. It's wild to me. I sent some links in the chat. I will post them on the page, because I when I first saw it, I was in disbelief, in shock. Like I'd never seen that before in my life. I didn't know that was a real thing. I thought it was like disinformation or like some kind of joke, honestly, that there was a 6-wheeled Formula One car. Yeah, what do you guys have on the Tyrrell P34 and a woman in Formula One, Leila Lombardi?
So women in Formula One, that can be a biopic in and of itself, because the stuff that had to be going on in and around the sport, from the people who didn't want her there to the fans and friends that wanted her to be there and to be successful, in conjunction with attitudes and dispositions about sexual preference and gender, that has to be an entire movie, like literally in and of itself. I can only imagine what it was like for her to ascend to that moment, and what she had to go through to get there, and then to be as competitive as she was. That's just marvelous. I mean, that's a story. That's one of those stories that somebody needs to sit down and put pen and paper, and they need to tell that one.
And I mentioned the point scoring because a lot of people that I've seen in like backlash against her said like, oh, she wouldn't have scored points if that race hadn't had such a terrible crash with 4 fans dying and an abbreviated field at the finish line. Not true. If we scored it the way that we do today, where the top 10 drivers score points, she would have been a point scoring driver in many other races. So it's not, should not take anything away from her and what she did. This was also a time where you had to qualify like per time. So you couldn't just like come in, show up, and you're there and you're going to be in the GP the way it sort of is now. Where if you crash in qualifying, or you could start from, the back of the grid or from the pit. So like, I hate seeing anybody try to take anything away from her and her success. I think what was going on socially, in this nation in the 70s, possibly contributed to some of that. Not to make it all American, but there was a huge feminist resurgence and movement going on. There was also just a political movement to shift paradigms in the way people think. People were starting to think a lot differently than they do even now, and were more accepting of differing ideologies. And Europeans tend to be a little bit more open-minded on things like this as well. So yeah, shout out to the world for allowing a female driver to compete and for making this a thing, because in other sports you didn't see it as accepted as well.
Yeah. So about those cars, you saw that back then, Ferrari and March did theirs, and they reversed it. They put the wheels on the back sides of the car.
And they tried, yeah, but it didn't work nearly as well. And there was, and we'll have to post this link, but there was somebody that went and rebuilt that car and raced it in the modern era, and were able to reach out to Tyrrell and their family and get all the schematics and blueprints and recreate it as close as possible. It's like thousands and thousands of hours, tens of thousands of hours went into this replica model and recreating it, but so freaking cool and amazing. I was watching videos on this, taking a bath because I live in Europe now, before the episode. So
this is what's so great about having, Formula One Fans of America in the first place, because like we say, global friends, Americans and global friends who share the passion for Formula One. And then you've got all the, transplants and expatriates, and it's just a nice hodgepodge of people that just love this sport. And that's what makes it so much fun to do this.
Mm-hmm. Now, onto the cars of the 70s. Let's talk about the turbine car. Okay. That thing was amazing. Like, straight up. It got banned in IndyCar. They're like, okay, cool. We'll bring it to F1. Let's see how it does. I mean, granted, it didn't do too well in the corners half the time, but the fact that it was able to produce that much power to all 4 wheels and create downforce at the same time was absolutely incredible. Like, the fact that they were doing this without huge amounts of wind tunnels. They weren't doing this with computers, anything like that. They were literally just, hey, I got a great idea. Let's do it. Let's get a couple beers and we'll talk about this and build it real quick. Like, absolutely insane, the engineering that they were able to pull. And realistically, I really wish that car would have been able to stay around. I think it would have been interesting to see where that would have evolved into.
No, it was amazing. So what we're talking about is an exhaust gas turbine car that was angled up at 45 degrees so that it would provide a thrust mechanism and additional downforce to the rear, and effectively gain like 40 to 50 horsepower from that, and generate to all four wheels because of the flow of aerodynamics. And like you're saying, without a wind tunnel testing this thing of just like sort of redneck engineering, but the European flavor of like, well, let's give it a try. I mean, we have money, we have time, we've got a team of smart engineers. Let's give this a shot. And to see it work and to actually perform and work well, we're talking about the Lotus T56B that competed in 1971. It's amazing. Like, so many crazy things happened during the 70s in F1 that like it makes it one of the greatest eras. And then the drivers and personalities that we had, like the separation between the races, the amount of overlaps, passing, there was a lot of mechanical failures back then. So that made things interesting for the Constructors' Championship. It wasn't a guarantee for any one team to step out. A lot of teams were using Ford Cosworth engines, but you still had Ferrari making their own engines and Alfa Romeo. So it was always you didn't necessarily knew who was going to win when you showed up on race day. And I think that's something that we all love is just the sheer amount of competition and the unpredictability that exists in that sport, like during the time.
Yep. The car like literally had what they referred to as a chimney. Which is such a bizarre concept to begin with. I could see the 60s and 70s cartoon artists having a field day with drawing that car as a cartoon show with like, coal in the back and like a whole crew inside the vehicle. It would just be a blast, because it's just such a quirky but innovative, unique solution. Did they not parade one of those out recently at the what's the deal that they do? Goodwood? Did they parade one of those out at Goodwood?
They might have. I can't remember.
I think they did.
Goodwood Festival of Speed.
Yeah,
I didn't see it, but I've seen a ton of cool videos coming out of that Goodwood Festival of Speed.
Those old cars are so much fun. I remember being a kid and getting a Formula One car from an uncle as a Christmas present that you put a D battery in and just pressed a button and it just went wherever it went. Couldn't steer. I mean, this is a long time ago. So you just press the button, it would go forward, and I remember it because it was blue and it was a Ferrari with the number 6 on the side of it. And just that low profile, really wide stance. It's just like a big torpedo, on wheels.
Well, let's actually do that. Let's take go ahead, Jay. Sorry.
I was going to say, so time for me to shock Rich. My favorite driver from the 70s, Sir Jackie Stewart.
Okay.
Arguably the greatest F1 driver of all time. The man was innovative for safety, which is why I'm saying this will shock you. He's led how many different protests against races, everything like that. He's still active to this day in the sport. Like, just an incredible all-around driver, too. I mean, 3 championships. He only quit at his 99th race. He didn't even race 100 races. He quit because his teammate died.
Wow.
He's like, nope, I'm good. We're done. So I've got nothing but respect for the man. I mean, the easy answer, obviously, and I'm not bashing on anybody, Lauda, Hunt, like you were saying earlier, Clark, but that was 2 years too early. Right. I mean, there's so many drivers that are the easy answer. But taking somebody who's done literally so much for the sport and putting them up there and winning 3 world championships. I mean, but he's British, so that's why I said Britch might be shocked on this one.
I'm a little shocked about the British aspect, but not at all about the safety aspect. Especially the more you and I discuss things, I could see the priority and where your loyalty lies when it comes to driver safety, and I respect and appreciate that above all else. I've been erroneous in some of my criticisms of things, and taking things out of the driver's hands, it was the wrong thing to do. I agree with you. In most situations in regards to safety, and if not all. I like that, man. I like that that's not an obvious choice, but one that has inarguably made one of the greatest impacts of the sport when it comes to safety. Yeah, I like that. Niki Lauda pulled himself out of the final race over a decision about safety and weather, not wanting to repeat any kind of incidents from the Nürburgring GP. Ended up costing him the championship that year. Came back and won it the next year because he is that good, and then won another championship in '84. So that is why I give it to him. His impact on the sport is equally measurable, I think, between those two drivers. However, one gets sort of the glory, the recognition, and notoriety, and the other doesn't. Mostly because he didn't crash and come back in such a heroic fashion. But both have had their mark on motorsport, Formula One, and safety in general. And honestly, other than getting Nürburgring canceled, I'm not sure much of what else happened after Niki's accident, other than drivers being like, no, don't need to do it. But there wasn't a lot of sympathy for playing things safe back then. As we saw the races continued and people, reacting in different manners.
There were some really interesting safety regulations that emerged in the period. There were circuit design modifications made to address runoff and things of that nature. They did catch fences. They started using sand in places more. Then they started providing marshal service roads so they could get to things quicker. But some of the more interesting ones were they rehearsed like 5-second extractions from the cockpits of the cars. They did international medical cards and examinations for all drivers, helmets being FIA approved to their standards, fire service regulations, obviously, that was in play already. The Nuremberg thing was crazy. You can't even spin up a helicopter in 6 minutes. I didn't think so. In one breath, it did take them a long time to get there, to get him out. But gosh, how did they get a chopper across that entire thing that quickly and get
it wasn't so that was the flight time. Didn't count for spin up. Yeah. That's why he was inhaling. He had inhaled gases. That was what almost had killed him, was not the actual flame itself. He was able to get out, but the inhalation of the gases cooked his esophagus and his lungs.
The staggered starting grid, that was implemented in 74. That was done with the 12-meter length per car at the time. That's what it was. I don't know if it stayed the same or if it's changed. But there are a plethora of safety regulations that were in play in their infancy and then subsequent, to what happened to Niki, that emerged in that period. So it's a very important period in the history of Formula One, for sure.
Totally agree. Let's go ahead and stay on this nostalgic tip and a little walk down memory lane, and let's go into drivers from the years we were born. And we'll go ahead and go in the order of seniority. So, Fabian, I'll let you start.
All right. So, Jim Clark. I was born in '63. I probably remember watching some of my first races closer to when I might have been 5-ish, But I was born in '63. He was born in '36. He died in '68. He was with Lotus, but he raced. I think he raced IndyCar, Formula One, and some other circuit that I can't recall right now. And he was a hell of a driver. I mean, he dominated when he was there, and I think '63 World Drivers' Championship That was the 14th season of the FIA recognizing the championship back then. And he won 7 races during that one. And the only 3 that he lost due to mechanical DNF. That's it. So they won the Constructors' Championship and the World Drivers' Championship the year I was born with Jim Clark at the helm. Pretty impressive dude. And then he died in a racing incident in 68. I don't recall where it was, but I'm going to look at it right now because I think I have something close by that I can put my eyes on. But I think it was an impact deal. Let's see. Yeah. But in his lifetime, he had 33 pole positions, 25 races, 72 Grand Prix starts. At the time, he had more Grand Prix wins and pole positions than any other driver, including Fangio. That's impressive. So pretty cool stuff. Very, very elegant guy. I think he was Scottish and kind of had that James Bond flavor to him, in appearance. He looked like he could play Bond. So there you go. That's my guy.
Awesome. Jay, who was yours?
Unfortunately, Nelson Piquet. I cannot stand this dude. Like, he was a great driver, shithole human being. I mean, I think the only gift they gave us was his daughter, who had Penelope, which is arguably the greatest F1 mascot ever. But yeah, no, I mean, dude won 23 races, has 3 world championships in 81, 83, and I think 87. Yeah, 87. I mean, I can't really say too much about this guy other than he raced hard and that's it. I got nothing else. It's unfortunate.
And Clark died in a Formula 2 accident at Hockenheimring in Germany is where it happened. It was a Formula 2. They would sometimes race other stuff. And just one of those weird moments in the history of the sport. Sorry about PK, man.
Yeah. I got Alan Prost. Don't have much to hold against him other than he's French. And I just have a strong distaste for anything French. However, he lost by half a point to Lauda in his final season in 1984, the year before I was born. And then he came back undisputed. No argument, was the world champion in 1985. Amazing driver, drove for some of the greatest teams, drove for, I believe, Williams and Ferrari. Let me double check.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, just very crazy.
We have a bunch of French FOFA fans that come in and troll us on the comment sections and stuff. They're ultimately really good people, but they come in there to mess with all the Americans and the other folks from different places around the world, and they flaunt their French, and it's fun.
I'll take it as well as I can give it. I've worked with their military in a few different places. They're okay guys. Yeah. This has been a really great walk down memory lane into the 70s and 76. I think we're going to jump into the 80s next year and start getting a little bit closer. We'll come out with some facts and figures about the cars of the time because things started to become more heavily regulated in the 80s. Yeah. We did have like flat 12-cylinder engines in the 70s, which is insane to me. Like, it's basically an aircraft engine. That's the main primary configuration for an engine of that size and like that configuration. And you make a flat series engine for aircraft because of the weight distribution. So like, it was just like, you guys were using airplane engines and airplane technology and just trying to incorporate that into Formula One. It was what made one of the things that made the 70s so special, as well as some of the uniqueness that we've highlighted throughout. But what a wonderful, wonderful time for the sport, honestly. And it must have been a great time to be alive and go to those events just because of how different and interesting they were. And even in the States, like, we had like the Long Beach Grand Prix back then, like crazy races all over the world that we don't have anymore. But yeah, this has been a wonderful, wonderful walk. Appreciate both of you guys. And with this, I think we're going to wrap up.
All right. Sounds great.
Take it
Thanks for
easy,
the
guys.
conversation. It was fun.
Of
All right.
course.
See you guys next week. We'll be
You bet.
covering the 80s next week
Closer.
on episode 3 of the Formula One Fans of America show.
Closer to the end of summer break.
Praise the maker.
Yes, one week closer. Yes, when we get back to racing and current events and what's going on.
Right.